Welcome back, boys. Today we have one from Akkad Daily, the Gen Z political split and its consequences. Let's check this out.
So everyone has noticed that there is a dramatic political divide in Generation Z between the women and the men. As you can see by polling that's been done, women tend to be skewing very radically liberal, and the men are in most cases a lot more to the center. In Britain, they're still really left wing, and in South Korea, they're really conservative. And there are other polls I've seen done that suggest that in America, Zoomer men are more conservative than their grandfathers, which is just such a great turn up for the books. But this has, as you can see, created a massive gender divide, and people are starting to notice this. People are starting to cotton on.
Because what he's talking about, the grandparents, these older generations, they got it wrong. They worked themselves to death. Like, they just kept working and it just didn't work.
They're wondering if it's about age of the cohort, like younger Gen Z versus older Gen Z, and maybe there is something to that, but I think a lot of it might just be down to political ideology. Because I saw this article on the New York Post, and it's about a woman who has noticed this trend as well. I think it's worth just going through and having a look at. So this is framed around the series White Lotus, and apparently there is a relationship in here where a younger woman chooses an older man.
This is nothing surprising. Women will choose the man with the most resources. This is just how it is.
And this is controversial for millennials, and I suppose inherited by Gen Z, that there is a power imbalance between them, and so this becomes a highly controversial thing. It's actually weirdly boomers tended to marry very close to their own age group as well. I actually don't know what it's like for Generation X. I married my wife is 8 years younger than me, and she's the one who came chasing after me, and she took a liking to me, and the rest is history. But the point being, there's something similar happening here with Gen Z women and millennial men. But they think there's a reason behind it, and it's actually about political ideology. So, according to one 19-year-old who's dating someone in their late 20s, so about roughly the sort of divide between me and my wife, she says, I'd go out on the odd date with someone my age, and more often than not, it would end up in a straight up argument where he started saying Andrew Tate makes good points. Again, you can see how this can be interpolated.
Okay. You are a idiot if you talk about politics with a woman on a date or anything like serious. I mean, you're supposed to. I don't know if you like. You can be serious and know what you want. I mean, you can bring up like planning, like what do you want, type of thing. Like, do you want children? How? Why? Do you have experience with children? Do you have siblings that you take care of? You ask such questions, but I would never, ever bring up politics. Hell no.
Interpret it.
It's always the women that bring it up too. It's like they spaz out. I have met women that like they just pass out and I have to tell something political. They tell me they wish death on like political figures, like Trump that got almost like shot. That was real. And I meet these women and they say, "Oh, I wish he would have, I wish he would have disappeared, right, on stage, on camera, live." It's like these people are insane. I don't like what kind of people am I meeting, man?
From the political divide. And then what she's saying is, hang on a second, I don't agree with Andrew Tate. Why are young men my age all people who are spouting Andrew Tate, Andrew Tate? And she says her boyfriend, quote, super chill, a feminist. Weirdly, so are most of his mates. He missed on all the manosphere stuff, and it shows, right. So he is a domesticated feminist soy boy. Right. Understood. And so the political divide
Simp that's gonna give her money,
between the men and women of Generation Z make the men less attractive to the women, because if the women are skewing radically to the left, and the men are not. I mean, they're not even very right wing in America, in the UK, even in Germany. They're not very right wing, but they're just like 1990s Democrats, which
I remember I went to a high school and we had actually like voting. Like there was like a poll that we did. Uh, I was, I think I was like 16 or 17 or something like that. It was for the whole high school, and we voted for like political parties here in Norway. There's many like different ones, but they're pretty much the damn same. It's all the young boys, all the young men, they voted. Everybody voted the most right, and the women voted left. I remember that.
by modern standards is far right, well, yeah, they're not feminist. They're not like super progressive. They're not self-abasing men.
Because as you grow up as a man, I think you start seeing reality at like age, I would say 12, 13. That's when like you really like wake up. It's like whoa, 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 whoa. What is this I'm living in? And you might not understand it yet. But as you grow up, you look back, at least I do. I look back and I think, yeah, like you wake up at a certain point and see how big difference is of what they say is reality and what actually is reality. And these women, they never get to see it, and a lot of them, they grow old and they see it when they're like 35, 40, post war. That's when they see reality.
Men who are unprepared to stand up for themselves. And so anyone who comes along saying men should stand up for themselves, actually, such as Andrew Tate, well, he does start making good points to those people because they have a dignity as men that they wish to preserve and have respected, which is actually completely reasonable.
I think Andrew Tate did a thing where he captured young men's hearts, and nobody on the left can capture men's hearts, young men's hearts. Nobody. You're just being told, oh, you're bad, just fucking existing. That's bullshit.
And so they say, look, with Gen Z women said to be leaning more progressive and outspoken, Gen Z men increasingly choosing conservatism, many young women say they're struggling to find like minded mates and instead are better matching up with the millennials. And millennial men are, of course, a total washout when it comes to being men. And there are numbers to back up the claims. They say only 56% of Gen Z report having had a romantic relationship in their teens, compared to 78% of boomers. That's not just a drop, that's a plummet. Yeah, that is remarkable, to be honest. Um, and the so-called Gen Blend relationship could be the answer. And Bumble says that 63% of users do that. Now, you get the expected, 21-year age gaps, the Leo DiCaprio types. Yeah, no, obviously that's too much. But the Gen Z women who have been taught by the millennials that any form of power imbalance is bad can't really get past this. And I think there's also something to do with the nature of basically men and women. Women are more interested in looking for men who are more experienced because they have higher status, they have more resources, and they project a more worldly demeanor to compared to young men who don't do this. And I'm sure that everyone remembers when they were in school and when they were 14 and their 14-year-old classmates who were women, who were girls, were dating like 16 to 18-year-olds, right? And
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure this is probably like a common thing. Like I remember I was going to school. I was 15, and like the girls were getting smashed by like 20-year-olds. It is what it is.
everyone's like, oh, they shouldn't be doing that. And they wanted to anyway because these guys were more worldly, they had more experience, they had more resources, they had access to cars, blah, blah, blah.
I think there was no 16. I think, yeah.
And it's just something that, honestly, as a teenage boy, you just have to kind of suck up. You just have to go, right, okay, all right, well, there's nothing I can do about that. I just have to wait for time to pass. Um, but the point being that this is something that is natural outside of this sort of setting. So, for example, if I became single tomorrow, I'd probably date a woman in her mid-30s, and I'm 45, right? So, and I think a lot of it is down to the fact that this is just a kind of natural evolutionary thing for women, and that they want to look up to their men. They want men who are admirable, whom they consider in some way, frankly, superior to themselves in experience, in resources, in wit, in knowledge. Women tend to, this is what hypergamy is. Women want to date upwards and want men who are better than themselves at doing things. And so the feminist attempt to level the genders and destroy men's ability to amass this kind of authority and gravitas in themselves has been totally destructive for women's relationships, women's romantic lives. Like, actually, and Jordan Peterson makes this point, what kind of partner do you want? It's like, well, the feminists have said we want everything to be the same. People have got to be born on exactly the same day and earn exactly the same amount of money. But women actually don't self-select for that. The revealed preference of women is actually they want men who they perceive to be superior to themselves in intelligence, earning power, height, physical strength, all of these other just things. Women want men who they can look up to. And that's totally reasonable and totally natural. But that also means, well, if we're in a society where men are deliberately immiserated, held back on purpose, by design, as a point of policy, to even the balance between the genders, well, everyone's love life gets totally thrown out of whack. Right? Men now can't really impress women, and so women don't really look up to them. And that means that women are constantly alone and just end up on, Tinder or Bumble or whatever, just essentially being very, very cheap prostitutes. And the men, and they don't get to form the relationship they're looking for. And men just either, like it's the 80-20 rule that we've heard so much about. The most attractive guys just go through women like.
It's I think the new stat was 95-5 or 98-2.
Toilet paper, and the other 80% of men just don't get women at all, because for the average guy, it's probably not his looks that are winning over most of the women around him that he gets to date. It's going to be his charm, his status, his worldly wisdom, his place in society, frankly, is what's going to be attracting a lot of women to him, because in other ways he's just average. And so giving the average man something that helps women find in him something attractive is actually really, really, really good for society as a whole. It's not good for feminism. And so you can see why a sort of centrist position would be, yeah, no, men should be the primary breadwinners, because then women will look up to them, women will rely on them, women will want something from them, and it is in this that women find their attraction to their men, assuming they're not just built Adonises, which, I mean, most of us just aren't, frankly. And so this is important for making healthy relationships. And men skewing towards being conservative represent that. The women skewing very liberal represents decades of feminist propaganda that is designed to equalize things. But even then, in their own stated preferences, they're like, no, we still want the superior men, because we can get men who, like, we want the older men who are, frankly, in agreement with us with our politics. And so the question for Gen Zers is, okay, well, what do I do, right? And well, the answer is actually not everyone is a radical leftist. Like, it is like a larger swing that way, but political content that you imbibe when you're young growing up, right? And so this is a fascinating post that I just saw going around on Twitter. Just some guy who's just like, well, here's something that happened to me. I knew something was up with Gen Z when an 18-year-old waitress at a diner I frequent told me women shouldn't vote. I want to be a stay-at-home mum. She was a totally normal girl, not online, just a typical hydro flask public schooler, unchurched. Signs were there. So, sure, like the older Gen Zs and younger millennial women are, of course, deeply indoctrinated into feminism, but the Andrew Tate stuff and the memes that come out of it, the way that people view the world, it's not just confined to young men. And I guess we can see from this that a lot of young women kind of agree, actually. And women tend to go a lot more conservative when they get married and have children. Which, if a woman is naturally inclined to want to get married and have children, then she's going to naturally be quite conservative and end up with some quite hardline opinions. Actually, I mean, women shouldn't vote is not an opinion I've ever voiced. And so it's you can see what I mean, like, and I consider myself pretty damn right wing these days. So it's interesting how there is this distinction, and how people are beginning to wake up to it. And so basically, if you're a sort of Gen Z guy, you're like 24, 25, you're probably going to have to wait a few years. But in like 4 or 5 years' time, the sort of, 20, 22-year-old women, well, they might well themselves be fairly right wing and themselves looking for people with whom politically they agree. And you might be in that position. So who knows? Maybe there's hope on the horizon. But I think it's interesting how the natural sort of nature's age difference between men and women, and I swear to God, I've seen this so many times. The most compatible couples seem to have like a good, 5 to 10 years between them. The younger women prefer the older man. The older man prefers the younger woman, and it just seems to, everything seems to just work naturally from this basis. This kind of extreme parity seems to be fairly unnatural, the product of feminism and the product of a political ideology that, frankly, as time might be coming to an end. So again, who knows? This all might fix itself. I don't know. But I think this is a very interesting development that does speak directly to the political bifurcation of the men and women in Gen Z. And I don't know what the solution is, frankly. I mean, let's hope that actually people choosing to consume right-wing content rather than being force-fed left-wing content just makes Gen Z and then Gen Alpha, who comes after them, well, a lot more right-wing than the bloody millennials and the older and the Gen Z women. And maybe it could be, fingers crossed, who knows, if we influencers on the internet keep doing our job well enough, that we eventually just, these guys turn out to be a bizarre aberration. Because I mean, like, the boomers are a sort of intrinsically feminist cohort, but they still lived relatively traditional lives in many respects because they grew up with their parents being very traditional. The Gen Xers seem to be happy to be traditional, as far as I can tell, although probably tend not to actually live traditional lives, whereas the millennials live completely feminist lives. And so maybe this becomes a weird aberration where, like, oh yeah, the millennials, insane intransigent feminists. But if we, the influencers, keep doing our job and you guys keep watching and we are promoting worldviews that actually make more sense to you on a natural level, that would actually make you happy, right? Rather than trying to artificially take you out of what it is that nature had intended for you, and we get back into a more wholesome world where people can live the lives that actually is best for them, then maybe the millennials get to be a weird aberration and your futures get to be better than their futures are going to be.
It is fascinating to think that at one point in time women were more conservative than men. I can't even comprehend what that would look like. Young men's life prospects destroyed, women most affected. A good chunk of my high school teachers loved pushing liberal agendas and man bad lectures, telling teenage boys why they are guilty of a crime they didn't commit isn't going to sit well with them. They didn't, you know. The problem with hypergamy is it doesn't stop. If a female lands, if a female 6 lands a male 8, they will adjust her assessment of self to 9 and go looking for a 10. They will continue this behavior until time renders them unwanted and alone. They blame everyone and everything else but the predictable results. Yeah, a lot of these women are alpha widowed. It's like they get a man. They go through so many men that they just can never be happy again because they will always compare. Oof. Anyway, this one was something. I see you boys on the next one.